Well, hi, friends. So it's day, I don't know, 6,422 of social isolation, and I am still purging and cleaning and doing things that I wouldn't ordinarily do, and I don't know why, because I don't go anywhere anyway. But nevertheless, in my ramblings as I'm picking up all my stuff, I found this wonderful little story that I had written years ago, and I thought I would share it with you as some short entertainment, although this is a little bit long. It's a couple pages. It's a good story. It's a happy ending, and I didn't name it at the time, but I think I'm going to name it Weem and the Twerfulnods, and you'll understand why here in a moment. It's a feel good story that I wrote years ago when I didn't have a boyfriend, and it's very clear that I probably needed one or two, nevertheless. Anyway, Weem saves the Weem and the Twerfulnods, and this is my story. Once upon a time, in a beautiful planet named Twerfulnod, a large population of Twerfulnodians were dealing with a problem. It was a serious problem, one most Twerfulnodians, Twerfs for short, had never dealt with. It seems that their princess, Gebelfine, soon to be crowned Queen Gebelfine, had taken ill. This illness was one that the Twerfs had never before encountered, and faced with the possibility of not having a queen to crown and no other candidate for such a prestigious title, the Twerfs were racking their brains night and day to find a solution. Even their miraculous Dr. Nod could do nothing for the princess except name this unusual malady, which he did. He called it Ik Mordid Stovfunk, or the funk for short. Dr. Nod always had a flair for names, but he tended to get carried away at times. Nevertheless, the Twerfs all gathered together for a Twerf out to discuss what to do about finding a cure for their beautiful Princess Gebelfine so that they could go ahead with the coronation. You see, not only were they worried sick about their princess, but the food for the coronation was spoiling in the Twerf stores. Twerfs are very conscientious about their food, since it tends to be scarce, since the mostly overweight and wasteful Blimpkins moved into the planet next door. The Twerf out lasted for a zipfor, equivalent to about a month, where every remote possibility was discussed, explored, and then abandoned for lack of a result. At this point, there was one frustrated group of Twerfs, let me tell you. Things looked bleak for the coronation. Twerful buds were wilting and food was spoiling everywhere, not to mention the fact that the Twerfs had no party to plan, and being a planet of very jolly creatures whose very lifeblood is partying, this was a disaster in and of itself. Something, anything, had to be done, and it had to be done now. But what? Finally, it began to rain, causing the Twerf out to become a Twerf in. The king, Bouflaplay, became so frustrated that his ordinary all-powerful brain that usually had all the answers had failed him. He cried out loud, "Oh, brosius, lip-slick, dubia stridinus, what is a king to do?" He shouted. The breeze that night were just right, and he cried out just loud enough to be heard on the planet above them. The planet was Zebron, and King Bouflaplay, our anguished displays of emotion just happened to fall upon the ears of Zebron's King Zeb himself. Now, anyone who, like myself, ever lived on the planet Zebron and knows the reputation of Zeb can tell you that old Zeb works harder at acting tougher than he really is. Why, I remember the time that a Mifflin got caught in a Newquart tree next to my house, and it was Zeb that climbed up that tree, crown and all, and rescued that Mifflin for that little orphan Zebronite who stood helplessly at the bottom of the weeping for a pet. Zeb tucked that creature in his royal shirt, an Eli Lilly original, and brought the Mifflin to safety. You can appreciate this feat even more if you know anything at all about a Newquart tree, which has a tendency for unpredictable mood swings and will at times refuse to let whatever it is in her boughs down until she's just good and ready, kings notwithstanding. I have heard Zebronite legends about folks who have been in a Newquart tree for days at a time, and all the while the tree will hold tightly to her victims while laughing uncontrollably and singing various verses of Beautiful Dreamer. Not pretty, I'm told. Survivors have been known to go mad afterwards. Anyway, I digress. back to the princess, King Boufflepre, and old Zeb. So Zeb heard the cries of the Twerf King and immediately set about the task of looking like he could care less so he could think about what to do. I suppose his concern was mostly compassion, but one would be very naive to ignore the possibility that Zeb wanted to help since he had hopes for a personal invitation to the coronation. Rumors were that Zeb had a crush on Gebelfine, but no one ever has been able to prove it. He called his doctor in for consultation. They considered this dilemma way into the wee hours of the Zebron night. Finally, Dr. Dasvidanya jumped from his gruel pit and exclaimed, "I've got it!" And immediately ran to his zebra hut and to set about the task of creating a cure for the princess. First, he called Dr. Nod on his intergalactic Yehudi to confirm the symptoms. Then, after looking up the symptoms in the first book of the Zebron Contagions by Aloy Podashki, he was sure. The malady that gripped the princess was very interplanetary virus, all right, never named because of its seriousness until Dr. Nod. No, one that once wiped out a whole colony of Quirtians on the planet Quirtip, 2 planets over. The bad news was the cure was in the sap of the Newcourt tree. Someone very brave was going to have to extract that sap, and someone very clever. Once again, Dr. Dasvidanya visited Zeb with his diagnosis and his dilemma. Zeb, as usual, acted quite indifferent while he thought. He waved the good doctor out of his royal hut so he could talk on the intergalactic Yehudi without being heard. And he called the only person clever enough, the only person brave enough, and the only person crazy enough to extract the sap from the Newcourt tree. Zeb called Weemowitz of Zebron. Weem was on a leave of absence from Zebron and doing a research assignment on the planet Earth. But once King Zeb told Weem about the princess, Weem, in her usual fashion of loving a challenge, immediately agreed to take on this unusual request and leave Earth, where she was making great strides in learning the fine art of earthly, things, provided, of course, King Zeb would pay for the provided, of course, that King Zeb would pay for the transportation for her return back. Weem was sending daily intergalactic Yehudis to the king, her latest interests being on love, something called the stock market, and some bizarre earthling sport where they go out on a trial bitute boat and throw a string with something attached to the end of it to try to catch some queer-looking and obviously rather stupid creature dumb enough to bite a sharp hook. Zeb was quite fascinated by these reports, especially those on the small engine repair, and gladly agreed to pay for Weem's return trip to continue her studies. On the Drumpenhoe ride back to Zebron, a plan was forming in Weem's mind, and upon her return had the whole thing scoped out. Simple, she thought. Just distract the Newcourt tree long enough to insert a variegated sap tapper into the vein of the Newcourt tree. She even knew what she would use for the decoy, and had a suitcase full of them for her plan. Weem wasted no time, since the kings from both planets had briefed her on the essence of time, and she knew that food was spoiling and the invitations were already mailed. Nothing could stop her. Besides, she had Earth animals to feed. Not to mention something they called a job on Earth that she had to go to every weekday. Earthlings were really weird about needing something called money to get things done or to get things from the store. A peculiar practice. Nevertheless, Weem had to fit in on Earth if she was to send accurate Yehudi faxes to Zeb. Slowly, cautiously, and bravely, with a suitcase and a peculiar-looking gizmo that turned out to be the variegated sap tapper in her hands, Weem approached the tree, while Kings Zeb, Boufflepre, Dr. Nod, Dr. Dasvidanya, and the entire choir from the First Zebron United Truist Ports Church looked on with sweat on their brows and a songbook in their hands. Dr. Dasvidanya had his pot boiling and additives all ready so the potion could be made right there on the spot. The fresher the better was the direct quote from the chapter on remedies. All looked on silently. Suddenly Weem began to sing. It was a song she had learned on Earth from a group of Earth children. "I'm a little teapot, short and stout," began Weem as the tree's eyes slowly began to open. "Here is my handle, here is my spout," and the tree began to growl. Weem knew that it was time and quickly opened the suitcase and continued to sing louder and louder. "Just tip me over and pour me out," she yelled, as the tree made a grab for her. Quickly, Weem began tossing the contents of the suitcase at the boughs of the tree, which caught each and every one of those mighty Morphin Power Ranger dolls just as fast as Weem could toss them. And with a signal from the choir, Weem began leading them in a chorus of Beautiful Dreamer. Now the new quark tree was completely confused, but soothed by the melody of the song and feeling quite smug for having a number of captives in her boughs, she began to laugh uncontrollably. She laughed louder and harder, and the choir continued their song. The tree began to laugh hysterically, so hard, in fact, that she momentarily closed her eyes. At that moment, Weem leaped at the tree and inserted the sap tapper into her trunk. The tree was laughing so hard now that she did not feel a thing. Her sap began to run instantly into the tube that was connected to the herbivator, which broke the sap down into the liquid that Dr. Das Vidanya immediately began to brew into the precious concoction for the lovely princess. Weem had accomplished a feat that would go down in Zebronite history, single-handedly extracting sap from a new quark tree and living to tell about it. When all the necessary sap was extracted, Dr. Nod gave a hard tug at the herbivator line, and the sap tapper was freed from the tree, which was laughing so hard now tears were coming out of her eyes, all 97 of them. The people of Zebron began to cheer, and the cheers were heard in Twerfulnod. The potion was whisked away immediately to Twerfulnod and administered to the princess. Almost immediately, Jebelfine got up and began to do something that she called the achy-breaky dance. Most Twerfulnodians just attributed it to the fever that she had had for so long, but were so delighted in her recovery and thrilled for the excuse to dance at anything, and they began to dance the achy-breaky dance too, which I am told now is the official dance at all coronations or official shindigs on Twerfulnod to this day. And so the coronation went on as planned. Twerfulnod had a beautiful and healthy queen at last, and the invitations did not have to be reprinted, and most of the food was salvaged. The twerf buds bloomed more beautifully than ever, and Weem, with that poop-eating smirk she always gets when she accomplishes something that folks didn't think was possible, and with a warm, toasty feeling in her heart from doing something good for someone, caught the first Drumpenho ride back to Earth to continue her studies. Zeb got his invitation to the coronation. Rumor has it he laid a big sloppy kiss on the new queen, but nobody ever proved it. Dr. Nod and Dr. Das Vidanya became the best of friends and later co-authored a very thick and informative interplanetary galactic medical journal, the first of its kind. The two planets became close friends and allies, planning twerf-outs in Zebron Ros, lasting for many Zip-4s at a time, and developing farm techniques that fed both planets so well that they no longer had to compete with neighboring Blimpkins for their meals. All was right with the galaxy, and sometimes, if the wind is just right and the night is just still enough, if you listen very closely, you can hear the new quark tree laughing. Still with the mighty Morphin Power Rangers in her boughs, she has never stopped. And folks from the planet Zebron and Twerfulnod wouldn't have it any other way. The end. Have a great night.